Hello everyone and welcome to this Aerospace and Aviation webinar on Boeing 737 MAX, a reminder of the challenges of innovating in commercial aviation. We are around 100 people signed up for this online event from various countries, France, US, and with various profile, working, of course, in the aviation and aerospace companies, but some people are as well consultant in different sectors, retail and manufacturing, for example. I'm delighted to have with me Jacques Beauchesne, who is the Academic Director for the Advanced Certificate in Innovation in Aviation and Aerospace. My name is Nadia Jabroni. I'm in charge of admission and development for degree and certificate programs at HEC Executive Education. It's an honor for me to lead this information session with Jacques. Welcome all, and let's get started. First of all, let's have a look on our agenda. The first part will be for you to discover more the aviation and aerospace program. Then it will be followed by a 20-minute discussion of the Boeing 737 MAX, a reminder of the challenges of innovating in commercial aviation. And we will finish up with around 10 minutes of Q&A. Please remember, feel free to ask questions during this online session in your question field, which is located down to the right of your panel. We'll try to answer during the webinar or during the Q&A session. For your information, this webinar will be recorded and we will send you the link to view this online conference again. Thank you very much. Now it's time for Jacques, the Academic Director for the Advanced Certificate in Aviation and Aerospace. Let's go.
Thanks, Nadia, and hi, everyone. So as Nadia said, I will first start by presenting to you the Advanced Certificate in Aviation and Aerospace. This HEC diploma is part of the Exec MBA or can be taken separately from the Executive MBA. For myself, I'm the Academic Director for this program. I've been Academic Director for 2 years. I'm an alumnus of this the 2008 intake of this certificate, which was the first one. And I also hold an International Aviation MBA from Concordia University in Montreal. And as I said, the Executive MBA from HEC Paris. My experience is mainly in consulting, in innovation, and mainly in the last 15 years, I've been involved in aviation with OEMs, airlines, and innovating partners. I'm also a founding member of 2 innovative startups, one that actually had been bought by a consulting firm lately. And what we do is we actually do the link between Embark data to optimize the fleet planning, MRO, and operations. I was also the transformation program manager for a large civil and defense OEM in the industry. The program I'm heading is aiming at executive and senior manager, civil or military, by the way, that have significant experience. Or what we've done lately also is people interested in aerospace and aviation, because there's a lot of potential for disruption in this industry, and people coming from outside the industry are more than welcome. The objective will be to develop your analytical and decision-making capability, and we will help you by providing in-depth understanding and the complex challenge of this industry.
Let's have a look on the another look at the program, Jacques.
Yeah, the way we actually designed this program is we have 2 5-day sessions. One takes place in July in Montreal, Canada, and the other one takes place in October in Toulouse, France. The reason we're going to Montreal, besides the fact that Montreal is definitely an important place for aviation, the main reason is that there's the presence of international institutions that you might know of, ICAO, IATA, CANSO, and a lot of industry decision-making is there. So every country that is part of ICAO has an ambassador representative from their country sitting there in ICAO. It's like a normal embassy. Huh? There's also the reason we're going there also is that there's the Institute of Aviation Management of Concordia University there. MIT professor will come to teach on revenue management, for example, and the airline business models. And we have the McGill Air and Space Law Institute that come to talk about mainly the airspace that we will talk about further, okay? And North American industry specialists. In Toulouse, what we do, we build on what we saw in Montreal. We add a defense aspect, and we, of course, we spend more than probably a day and a half, just little less than a day and a half with Airbus. We visit the final assembly line of Airbus, and also culminates with the presentation of your team research project. Because you would have, if you join the program, to work on a research project. And what we're trying to have you identify is what are the opportunity in the business, what are the regulations that could impede my desire or capability to innovate, and you have to define a project and work in teams and present that project to a pool of HEC teacher.
Please, if you want to find out more about this executive certificate in aerospace and aviation, do not hesitate to get in touch with us. Please, emba@hec.fr. If you want to know the admission process, it's an online application, and we'll be very happy to tell you more about it. Now, let's go to this webinar and this session about innovation. Please, Jack.
Yes, okay, so now we're going to get to the point where you probably are the most interested about, is the webinar itself. Okay, what we have to recognize, I used the example of the B737 MAX issues to actually say that there's a lot of challenges related to innovating in commercial and aviation. And okay, aviation is not different from any other business. The pace of innovation is more rapid than ever. The problem is that not all industries are equal in terms of safety, and aviation, for one, is certainly really focused on aviation, has been for many years, and this is still the case. So the angle I want to give to this masterclass is to explain to those who would like to introduce innovation in commercial aviation, what are some of the key challenges. So we won't discuss, of course, of the detailed implication of what is going on with the 737, but what does that mean to people that want to innovate in the industry. So what I've decided, of course, there's a lot more challenges than the three you see there on the slide. So we will address in the time given those three key challenges. The first one being the fact that this industry is part of a complex ecosystem. So depending where you enter into the ecosystem, the challenges would be different. It's highly regulated, even if a lot of the regulation has happened in the airline operation itself. The fact that you are flying an aircraft, there's a lot of regulation involved. You're crossing a lot of countries, there's safety issues, and so forth and so on. And the third aspect is, I will talk, it's of course a challenge for the industry, and environmental sustainability is a challenge for the industry, but it's also a big source of opportunities for a lot of people who want to innovate in the industry. So we'll talk about that also. Okay, so being part of the ecosystem, okay, as you can see, and as you probably know, at least some of you probably know, whether you're an operator, an airline, whether you're an airport owner or an OEM, you're part of a complex system. You're not isolated in your industry and not looking at the rest of it. So from an airspace perspective, there's a lot of regulation and policies. ICAO actually is the organism that was created in the 40s through the Chicago Convention. And the head office or the seat of ICAO is based in Montreal, and depending from what country you come, you probably have a representative, which is an ambassador, like any other ambassador, sitting at ICAO. So for example, France has an ambassador, and we'll talk about that further. We will meet with him in Montreal. There's two programs currently in the world that address the challenges of airspace, because the main challenge around airspace is the fact that we're flying more. Traffic, air transport grows very rapidly, and there's less space. Technology is helping of reducing the space between aircraft while maintaining safety, of course. And in Europe, there's a program that addresses that, is CESAR, and in US, there's a program, the equivalent, that is called NextGen. The air navigation service providers, for example, in France, that would be the DGAC. That's and in US, it's the FAA that does that. There's an international organism called CANSO, and CANSO is also based in Montreal, and we meet with the people from CANSO also when we go to Montreal. This has to do with the air traffic control. So it's a control tower that controls the traffic around the and the cruise part of the aircraft, but also on ground at the airport. So there's a lot of challenges related to the infrastructures that are needed to do this and advanced operations. From an operator's perspective, of course, you have the commercial airlines. This is probably what we see the most, but you have a lot of business and general aviation aspect to address. There are helicopters, military aircraft, and if you take the example of France from a regulatory perspective, most of the French airspace is military. So when you fly a commercial aircraft, you need to have the space granted by the military. They are represented, most of airlines are represented by IATA, and IATA again is based in Montreal, and we meet with them. Of course, in operators now, and we will have these discussions from a regulatory perspective in Montreal, you have drones and the equivalent. So this will add to a challenge from the perspective of the industry. Then you have airports, and airports are part of that ecosystem. If you take the example of the Airbus 380, one of the issues with the Airbus 380s is that it needed a lot of transformation at the airport to accept the aircraft because of its two decks. So that was a challenge in a lot of aspects. Not all airports wanted to invest in modifying to accept the 380 at their gates. If you look at the US, a lot of airports are owned by municipalities, so cities. Usually there are state-owned and some are privately owned. If you take the example of the issues with the privatization of the Toulouse airport, that's an example. But a lot of airports now in the world are privately owned or concession given by the governments. And you have the military base. Again, they are represented, most of them, by a group that is called the Airport Council International, and again, there's the office of ACI is in Montreal, their main office. Okay. Then you have the original equipment manufacturers. Of course, you have the airframers, and the most known are Airbus and Boeing. Of course, they have a quasi-equivalent share of the market for a certain size of aircraft. You have the systems integrator, the engine manufacturers, and the main component manufacturers. And you have also the service that maintains these airframes, engine and components. So they are called MRO, maintenance, repair, and overall service providers. You have logistics for the parts. You have software, which was the case, probably part of the case with the MCAS software on the 737. So you have software that is also now becoming more and more important in the operation of not only the aircraft, by the way, but usage of airspace. Air traffic control relies a lot on software, and the operators themselves, and airport as well. And so everybody has more and more software like any other industry. And you also have a big part of financing, leasing of insurance. And insurance, a lot of airlines, some airlines are mostly leasing their aircrafts. Now they're not buying the aircraft. Okay.
And what about hospitality? Yeah,
hospitality is a topic we don't address directly in the program, but it's quite important because it's the airline industry exists because the people want to travel and want to go from one place to another. So of course it's related with hotels and lodging, but it also has competition. If you look in France, for example, the rail transport is a big competition for Air France because some parts of France are better served by rail than by aircraft. So this is, and now that you have a lot of high-speed project train in the world, this is a topic we address indirectly. We talk about it, but it's not really in the course of the program. So what can be done is you could do a team research project around those aspects, and you have the global distribution system. So that's the Amadeus of the world, and you have travel agency, and like any agency, you go online to buy your tickets. Okay. So this is also highly regulated. So we say it's a regulated market because the operators can fly everywhere, almost now in the world. But it's highly regulated by mainly the FAA in US and the EASA in Europe. So those are the big two regulators in the world. So their scope is different, but mainly they can regulate any of the aspects that you see on the slide, probably except for hospitality. But the rest, they have regulation, different part of their regulation to address airspace, traffic control, the operation of aircraft, airports, certifying parts and aircrafts, and making sure that the maintenance is done properly. So they regulate all this. I've put on there, because I'm a Canadian born, of course I put on there the fact that every country has its own civil aviation. Canada has the Civil Aviation Authority, and even if Europe has EASA, France still has DGAC that takes care of making the regulation operational in France. Okay, so how do we address the fact that you are part of a complex ecosystem in the program? So what we do is each part will be addressed, like I said, except for hospitality. So for airspace, what we do is we have Dr. Weber from the Institute of Air and Space, McGill University, to come and talk about how regulation happened and what are the challenges related to airspace now. Because as you probably know, the airspace is limited to, I think it's 100 miles or 100 kilometers above the ground of a country. Beyond that, it's whoever wants to do whatever it wants to do, it does it. That's a problem, because now we have travel to space, and that will come, and we have also drones that come into play. So Dr. Ludwig Weber would address that in one lecture. And we also will have a presentation on CESAR, which is the single European sky. So what is happening in Europe is we're trying to make Europe one sky. So now it's regulated. If you're an airline and you operate over a different European country, you need to address air space with different countries. The air navigation service provider, so this for SkyGuide is a Swiss operator, and NAV Canada, of course, is the ANSP of Canada. So we have board members of people. So in Montreal, we have NAV Canada people coming and talk about the challenges and opportunities in ANSPs, and SkyGuide will do the same. And the SkyGuide lecture also will address the aspect of CESAR, because CESAR is a concern for SkyGuide, which is a small country, and what are they doing about the fact that the tendency in Europe will be to have fewer and fewer ANSPs. Okay, so that's the thing we talk about. From an operator point of view, we will have an Air France KLM executive in charge of transformation come and talk to us. And what is actually interesting is that the executive was part of Air Canada last year. And he actually did the lecture last year in Montreal, being an Air Canada executive. So this also could be very interesting. Discussion around the differences between the way we operate airlines would be of interest. The airports, we will have the Director General of ACI, Angela Gittins, that will come and talk with us. She will actually have a lunch with us in Montreal, so that will be a great time to understand the challenge of airports, and they are very, very challenged by the change of transportation. And they will have drones flying over their airports quite soon, I think, from legally speaking, because now things are happening, and they still have to deal with this, but they will need to deal with the airspace, because they are responsible for the airspace around the airports. Okay, from the OEM point of view, we will visit. We first spent a full day with Airbus people, so we tried to understand what are the key challenges and how Airbus sees the future of air transportation. So we addressed that from several point of view, and we will visit the final assembly line of the Airbus 350, which is always very interesting. And we will, what I have not written there, we spend the whole day when we visit the FAB, we spend the whole day with the program manager and the technical head of the program. So that's quite interesting, because the way they've dealt with that program is very interesting within Airbus. From a services point of view, we will have the head of an airline MRO. So from a maintenance perspective of aircraft, we will have the point of view of what are the challenges and opportunities in maintenance and it will be from in Montreal from a Canadian airline that you probably know of. Okay. We will also have a testimony in Toulouse from a successful French aerospace startup. So it's a startup that decided to invest a lot to research in the software for optimizing the maintenance of aircraft, and that person will come and talk about how did that happen. And I know he will be talking a lot about the hurdles he's encountered. And the way also to address what we will ask you to, what we ask the participants to the TRP is to say, okay, you want to innovate in this industry, but you need to take into account the complexity of the industry and not see your innovation as something isolated. And I will bring also my personal point of view, because I was involved in innovating in aviation, and the tendency is to see your innovation as an isolated thing, but as you saw in the first diagram, it's a very complex environment, and you need to understand that. Okay? Okay, so the second part I'd like to address is regulation and safety, and of course, the challenges Boeing is facing now with the 737 obviously had to do with regulation. In aviation, we define airworthiness. Airworthiness means that the aircraft is worthy of flying. So this is, okay, so that the way this is defined, and this would be addressed by Dr. Weber, of course, is you need to make sure that the aircraft is compliant with the type certificate. So the FAA or EASA will give the certificate to the plane to fly, the right to fly. So it needs to be compliant to that. And then after the aircraft has been certified, it needs to be operated safely operated, meaning that an aircraft will fly several times. You will need to change parts, you will do modifications. You need to take into account the flying conditions. So the aircraft, after being certified, needs to remain safe to operate in time. From a legal point of view, and this is not a soft thing, it's a state of being. So airworthiness is when the aircraft is flying, is it capable of flying according to the airworthiness? And of course, as I said before, so the type 1 quality is adherence to how you specified. So the aircraft was built as specified, and then it remains, its fitness to use is that if you change things to the aircraft, it still remains fit to use. So this is the type 2 quality certification. Of course, and depending on some countries, the courts make the law. So in North America, I would say Quebec being an exception, but in France, it's the code, the civil code that makes the law, but in a lot of countries, the courts make the law. So what happens in courts, the decision that comes from courts make the law, and what the courts say, and the regulators also have added is you not knowing if your aircraft is fit for flying. So if it's airworthy, is per se saying it's not worthy to fly. So you could never claim that you did not know. So because the regulation is quite cumbersome, a lot of companies need to have a lot of people to make sure things are airworthy. Okay, so how do we address that in the certificate? So, okay, we spend half a day with the French ambassador. So we are welcomed by the French ambassador, and it will be his last term when we go this summer. It will be his last term after he will leave. So we are within the walls of ICAO in Montreal, and people from CANSO, so from the Civil Aviation Navigation Service Provider, so the ANSP. The head of CANSO will be there also, and the head of IATA will be there also too. And it's really in a, they of course present what ICAO is there for, what CANSO is there for, and IATA is there for, but there's a long time that we actually, for more than an hour, we exchange, we ask questions. A participant have an access to very high-ranked people in the industry. So this is a very interesting moment, and that takes place on the Friday morning after you've accumulated a lot of knowledge. Okay, of course, again, because it has to do with regulation, this is an aspect that Professor Weber would address. And we will have a presentation in Toulouse from an executive from a navigation service provider on César, so how we're trying to optimize the airspace in Europe. And we also have a lecture in Montreal about digital twins, digital analytics, and the aviation digital thread. So what the discussion is there about is there's a lot of possibility to disrupt in this industry. So for those of you who know the challenge related to the fact that we design an aircraft and then it's maintained and a lot of data is produced by an aircraft, and how can we use that data to optimize the availability of aircraft? This is we take half a day in Montreal to discuss these aspects. Okay, so the last but not least is the environmental sustainability. I think it's a preoccupation for a lot of people. Okay, there's a lot of discussion about flying is not very sustainable, but it contributes to, I don't know if you can say only, but to 2% of global carbon emission. But the IATA, so the airlines, have decided themselves to say, okay, we need to do something about this. And the reason being for that is that aircraft traffic grows very, very rapidly. So if we do nothing, these emissions will grow as we go over the years. So they came up with a program called CORSIA, and the aim is to mitigate these emissions. And this is governed by ICAO. And so ICAO and IATA really work closely together on this. And this is mainly an airline issue. So what they want to attain is to remain at the level of 2020. So what they've done, so after 2020, there should not be a growth in emission, knowing that the traffic will grow by a lot. And since what they've done since January, actually, they've been tracking this year, they've tracking their CO2 consumption, the airlines. And the way they will need to address that is by mitigating, by planting trees and things like that. Projects that will actually involve a lot of people outside of the industry. The UN has said, though, that the challenge that the industry has self-imposed himself is very challenging. So there's a lot. They will need a lot of help to go through this. So, like I said, they started tracking their emission. It's mandatory for all airlines to do it, and in 2020 they need to be at that level forever. Okay. So we'll see how that goes. So how do we address that in the certificate? Well, we will have a lecture from somebody from ICAO on CORSIA, of course. IATA, then, that we will have the head of IATA to talk to us about how the industry sees this and what are the opportunities for innovators to support them with their targets and compensation program. And that's it.
Thank you very much, Jacques, for this very enriching presentation. The topic is very challenging, so I'm sure we have questions. I can see a question maybe from Sophie. Hello, Sophie. You're working in the military sector, and I guess you talk about the researching projects. Is it a problem if we don't have already a project, but just an idea? And you were writing the idea below. Thank you, Sophie.
Yeah, it's usually the case, by the way. And what we do is we make it a competition. So it's on the first day. So we always meet the Sunday before. So in Montreal, you would have to arrive the Sunday before. We spend 2 hours together to meet, have drinks, and exchange. And what we do for an hour or so is everybody presents his project and try to sell it to the others. So it's your first take to HEC, trying to sell your idea. There's two ways to answer this question, Sophie. The first one is either you convince other people to work on your project, which is so you would need to propose your project before, need to explain in broad sentences what you try to accomplish, and then either you convince people to work with you, or you are part of another team and you can develop your idea part of another project, because a lot of projects have similar challenge they want to address. And so this is how we go about this. So the objective is to have it as a team. So normally it would be at least 3 people working on the same subject. Okay?
So each one can be complementary
within
the group.
Yes. You could have a project that globally addresses several aspects, and depending on what you would like to work on, your aspect would be part of that project, of course,
Okay.
or your project is the project. So that depends on what is the scope of your project and what you try to accomplish.
We have as well a question from Remy. Yes, Remy, of course, it is possible to get the presentation. This conference online is recorded, and we will send you the link so you can have a look again on it. We have a question regarding CORSIA. Can you tell us more about this new regulation?
Yeah, I think CORSIA, the industry has realized that from the public opinion, airline were seen as a very high polluted and a lot of air traffic growth and all that, and there's a lot of pollution also related to noise. Okay, so the industry, okay, the question is not to say is it polluting more than another. They've decided to address that. So the opportunity that is offered, and this has been addressed in several research projects, part of the program, is what does that mean to people that are not in the airline industry, basically. They will need to offset. So the objective, if I'm not an expert on CORSIA, but the objective is to say, okay, what is the consumption of every airline 2020? And beyond that, it should not grow. Okay, so it means that when they will close the book in 2020, this will be the figure that will be actually audited on, and if they spend more, they will need to offset. And the offset project are several, so you can offset to planting trees, to do whatever. So if you're not in this industry, this industry can be a client of you if you have compensating projects. The other aspect is also that technology is, the hope is that technology will help the airlines to save. And this, the 737 MAX was the answer to the Airbus 320 Neo to say, okay, we need less consumption from our aircrafts. So they introduced a new engine. So that was a technological innovation to help airlines meet that objective. Yeah.
We have a question from Bruno. Are you discussing, Jacques, aviation security in the program AVSEC?
Not directly, no, not directly. But the problem is that the aviation and aerospace, because also I've presented this from an aviation point of view, but we also address aerospace aspects. So we will have space aspects also. So we have people from ESA, so European Space Agency, to come, and we also address this because we believe that the airspace and the space will be one place in the near future. So because it's so broad, we cannot cover all aspects. But to be fair, you will have time, and usually the people that come to the program and teach in the program, they stay afterwards, so you can ask questions. And what is great about this program, and I can testify because I have an IT background, so I knew nothing about this industry. I knew little when I came in 2008, but it gives you access to a network. It gives you, they will all give you their email, their contacts, so you can actually keep in contact with them. But it's quite hard to address every aspect, but certainly you can find within the program somebody that could help you with the security aspects. Yeah.
The topic of this webinar was about the Boeing 737. Do you think these events will impact the introduction of innovation in the commercial aviation industry?
Yes, I think it's, and the company we had created has had to do with using software to optimize maintenance, okay? And we rapidly, and that's why I did this certificate, we rapidly noticed that, okay, you cannot innovate in this industry like in any other industry. It's highly regulated. And I think now that with what has happened, I think the regulator will be more vigilant. This is not saying that the regulator was at fault or anything like this, but they will be more vigilant. So I think regulation should not be seen as restricting innovation, but you need to conform to that. Okay, so there's a question about, did I understand well, the certificate will help me to meet people working on my project, or will give me advices on it. Yeah. We actually ask you to meet people that could be potential customers, and this is a part that is really important. You don't do that in closed walls. You need to go and meet with people from the industry to see how to test the feasibility of this.
Daniel, of course, we will get in touch with you to tell you more and to explain you more the admission process. We still have some room for the July session in Montreal, so we'll get in touch with you, Daniel. And Sophie, I hope it clarifies your question regarding the research team project. Lately, maybe a question about the innovation process in commercial aviation. Jacques, as the academic director, have you been involved in this kind of process during your professional life?
Yeah. With as I said before, I think the lucky part of what we did is we had nothing to do with the cockpit. What you will need and will be addressed in the program is if you put something in the cockpit of an aircraft, then this is very highly regulated. You can't do whatever you want. Even now, in outside of the cockpit of the aircraft, it's very regulated. It's part of a design process. You cannot arrive at any given time. You need to prove, you need to document a lot of things, certify, be part of a certifying process. And we address specifically the innovation process within Airbus, and we will be also we will have, I did not show it, but we will have they've created a lab, innovation lab at Airbus, and the head of the lab will come and talk to us. So they have, so your TRP, if you're a bit advanced, when we get to Toulouse, you could even have a discussion with the head of, I forget his last name, it's Bruno something, I forget his last name, but he will come and present the Airbus lab. So if you have a great project and you could actually grab in, maybe you could be part of his promotion.
Okay, thank you very much. It's now time to leave us. We have recorded this information, so we have your info contact. If you still have some questions, please feel free to contact us, and Jacques and I will be happy to answer those questions. Thank you very much, Jacques Beauchesne, for your presentation and for your time. Thank you all, dear participants, for taking part to this session today. We remain at your disposal. Please have a look on our contact. On our contact detail. emba@hec.fr. If you want to understand the dynamics and complexity of this global deregulated market and to develop your global vision, let's embark with us. We'll get in touch very shortly with you. Thank you very much. Have a lovely day. Bye-bye.
Have a great day. Thanks.